Hi everybody, it's Miss Alicia again, back reading Ivy and Bean. We are in chapter 7 now. So if you haven't joined us before, I'm Miss Alicia. I normally work at the Capitol branch of the Milwaukee Public Library. And while we're all at home, I wanted to share one of my favorite books with you, book series, Ivy and Bean. It's by Annie Barrows. And it's published by Chronicle Books. So thank you again, Chronicle Books, for letting us read this to our friends. So hopefully, if you have been enjoying it, awesome. If this is the first video you are seeing, hopefully you like it and you'll go back to the other ones. So yeah, I'll get started with chapter 7. It's called Easy Peasy. So there's Bean. Ivy, if you remember, dressed up in her new robe and her crazy face makeup. So let's see what's going to happen. Now they were ready to begin. Ivy went to the bedroom section of her room and pulled a cardboard box out from under her bed. Then she looked at Bean. "This part is really secret," she said. "I promise I won't tell anyone," said Bean. Ivy opened the box and took out a square thing wrapped in pink, silky cloth. It was her spell book. Bean thought that a spell book would be mysterious looking, with a magic sign on the cover or something. But this spell book was plain black. It was old, though. Ivy said it was almost 100 years old. The pages were yellowish. "Where'd you get it?" Bean whispered. "My aunt gave it to me," Ivy said. "Is she one?" asked Bean. "She says she isn't," said Ivy, "but I'm not so sure." Ivy flipped through the book for the dancing spell. She read it to herself and then she whispered it, but so low that Bean couldn't hear. Bean didn't mind. Everyone knew that witches' spells were private. After a few minutes, Ivy said, "Got it. It's a pretty easy spell. The only thing we need is worms." Luckily, there were lots of worms in Bean's backyard, tons. But now they were going to have to sneak into Bean's yard and dig them up without Nancy seeing. So here they are looking at the book. Bean's looking over the shoulder. But also luckily, Bean knew how to get into her yard by going through the other backyards on Pancake Court. There was one really gross dog poopy yard, and there was Mrs. Trance, who didn't like kids in her garden, and there was a lot of climbing. But aside from that, Bean said, it was easy peasy. Ivy put the big black book in her backpack. Bean tucked the wand into her back pocket. It was still a little drippy, but there was nothing Bean could do about that. Carefully, they tiptoed down the stairs. Ivy's mother was still working in her office, and they slipped past her door like quiet ants. Soon they were moving quickly toward the back fence. Ivy, Bean saw, did not really know how to climb a fence. She jumped at it, hoping that she would get to the top. Bean showed her how to find the little holes and bumps that make a ladder. So here they are sneaking out of Ivy's house. Here is Pancake Court. Wow. When they got to the top, Bean whispered, "This is Ruby and Trevors' house. They have a good sandbox." The good news was that there was a gate on the other side of Ruby and Trevors' yard. The bad news was that it led to the really gross dog poopy yard. Bean and Ivy walked on tiptoes, but still Ivy stepped in some. Fester, the dog whose poop it was, came out to sniff them. He was a nice dog, and he seemed sorry that his yard was so disgusting. And there's a picture of him. He's sad. The next fence was low and easy, except that the wand fell out of Bean's pocket and she had to go back and get it. Then came Jake the teenager's house. There was loud music with lots of bad words in it coming from the garage. There was no way Jake the teenager was ever going to hear them walking through his backyard. Mrs. Trance was next. Getting into her yard was no problem. Ivy and Bean climbed over the stone wall and dropped down onto her lawn. Everything in Mrs. Trance's yard was perfectly neat. Her tulips were lined up in rows. Her apple tree was tied so that its branches grew flat. Her bird bath had no birds in it. "If Mrs. Trance sees us, she's going to be really mad," said Bean. Bean knew this garden. It was very long, and there was no way to go around it. "Is she going to throw rocks at us?" asked Ivy. She looked a little scared. "No, she just talks, but it's worse than throwing rocks," Bean sighed. "Maybe she's not home." But Mrs. Trance was home. They were halfway across her perfect yard when she came outside. She stood on her patio and glared at them. "Bernice," she said in a high voice, "come here." Bean took a few steps toward the patio. "Closer, please, Bernice. It seems that we need to have another one of our little talks." Ivy came and stood beside Bean next to the patio. "Who are you?" said Mrs. Trance, frowning at Ivy's white witch face. "My name is Ivy," said Ivy. "Well, Ivy, children are not allowed in my garden. Maybe you can teach your friend Bernice that." Mrs. Trance gave a short, dry laugh. "Because Bernice does not seem to be able to remember it by herself. Do you, Bernice?" "I remember, Mrs. Trance, but it was just sort of an emergency," said Bean. "I'm sorry." "Usually when you say you're sorry, people say something nice back to you. Not Mrs. Trance," she said. "I don't think you're sorry, Bernice. If you were sorry, you wouldn't keep coming into my garden when I have asked you not to. Do I need to call your mother again?" She smiled in an unfriendly way. Bean heard Ivy sucking in her breath. "She's about to do something," thought Bean. Here is Mrs. Trance yelling at the girls. Bean and Ivy. What is Ivy going to do? "I'm going to throw up!" Ivy said loudly. "Yuck!" thought Bean, whirling around to see. Ivy looked at her and crossed one eye a tiny bit. Bean looked closely at Ivy. Then she said, "That's the emergency I was telling you about, Mrs. Trance." Mrs. Trance then looked worried. Ivy burped. It sounded horrible. Mrs. Trance jumped back. Go home, run!" "That's what we were trying to do, Mrs. Trance," Bean said sweetly. She was having a good time watching Mrs. Trance's face. "Go now!" yelled Mrs. Trance. Ivy gagged. Mrs. Trance ran inside her house and looked at them through a window. She wagged her hand to shoo them away. Shoo, shoo, shoo. Here's Ivy, pretending to be sick. She waved goodbye as she and Ivy walked away. Ivy gave one more disgusting burp, just for fun. Bean tried to hold her laughs in, but they came out her nose, and then Ivy couldn't hold her laughs in either. It was a good thing they were in the next yard by then. It really was easy peasy after that. They went across Kalia's yard. Kalia was in her high chair at the kitchen window. She waved her spoon at Bean. Bean waved back and then put her finger to her lips. "Shh," she whispered. Finally, they came to Bean's own yard. That is the end of chapter 7. We will see Bean's backyard in the next chapter. So if you guys liked this chapter, and if you've been liking Ivy and Bean, you can actually read this on Hoopla or on the Libby app. And there's also tons of other great series like this, this level. So like the Clementine series and Judy Moody, and even the Princess in Black. So if you want, you can check those out as well. Also check on our website, mpl.org, to find other programs that we have that we're holding. And also look on our social media sites. We are on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So hopefully you enjoyed it and you'll come back and see another chapter again tomorrow. See ya!